a market rate unit, also with supportive services. So both types of PSH are encapsulated in Central Command, and when we say PSH, we're talking about those two things interchangeably. So what happens, and this is, again, just intended to show the complexity of how Los Angeles receives money from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. LAHSA is the collaborative applicant for the region of Los Angeles. So on behalf of all of our partners, we submit a competitive application to HUD every year requesting funding to support our homeless activities, rental services, et cetera. Over the last couple of years, we have maintained the highest award in the country, not only because of need, but because of our competitive nature. So we've become very efficient at putting in competitive applications that have resulted in big awards to our jurisdiction. So what you're seeing here is the top box is an example of the award that we received for the year 2018. We're using this year because the way that the grants come to us, they all have different timelines, and we're still technically in the 2018 year of grant being extended. So LAHSA will receive the award, which in this case was $124 million, that represented 144 individual grants that went to individual agencies. So although it comes through LAHSA, it then goes out to our partners at DMH, DHS, the housing authorities, who then also take those grants and issue them to our providers on the street. So it gets very diffuse very quickly. And then again, the goal is to spend down as much of that grant money as possible. And this just gives an example in 2018 of how the grants were broken up and who administered those grants primarily. So what we recognize is that because it's so diffuse how money is put out on the street, it's hard for us to come together collectively as applicants to reconcile in real time how we're doing at spending down our grants, because there's so many folks that have their hand in the pot, if you will. So Housing Central Command is helping us do that, not only by coming together face-to-face, but also by building redundancies and levers within our systems so that we have a more automated way of knowing where we stand at any given time, and also building platforms so our systems can talk to each other. So the DHS and DMH system can communicate with our HMIS system that we use on the homeless side, can then talk to the housing authorities, and it becomes less manual, and we'll see in more real time how we're doing at spending the money that we receive. In the situation where the grants close and we're no longer able to spend, in those situations, the money then gets recaptured and sent back to HUD to go back into the pool for competitive applications. So that's the underutilization that we're talking about, is trying to minimize that amount that goes back as much as possible.
So one, I wasn't aware that we were returning funds to HUD.
Yes.
So from what program are HUD funds? Is it under the COC? Under the community?
It is, yeah. So,
yeah.
Every continuum of care across the country returns some level of funding to HUD just by nature of not being able to use the subsidies. Tight rental markets could be a reason for that. There's a number of reasons that drive that. So what we're trying to do here is identify reasons for underutilization of why are we returning money, which of those things are things that we can control because our processes can be better or how we're administering can be better, and what are the things that are outside of our control. So example, our tightening rental markets and the availability of affordable housing would be driving factors that we wouldn't have control over, but we certainly need to address. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Yeah.
My kind of second point on this is, so there's a major driving factor that I do not see here.
Okay.
I think it's more, it's a more substantial, more impactful one than most of these, and that's illegal discrimination.
Oh, absolutely.
Discrimination based on race, discrimination based on disability.
Yep.
Landlords reluctant to rent to people using every reason, a pretextual reason. It concerns me. I don't see that here.
Yep.
It should be here at the forefront.
Yeah.
Especially since, recent law under SB 329 and so forth, it kind of covers some of these things like landlords' willingness to participate and so forth.
Yep.
But unfortunately, underlying racial and especially based on disability will always be a primary factor. So that should always be at the forefront.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's absolutely something that we're aware of and we're talking through. I think we can make sure we add it to this slide. It's certainly an underlying factor. And landlord willingness, of course, drives that. So what Housing Central Command did is, again, took this crisis response model and applied it to this portfolio, and then started to look at our entire portfolio of funding in Los Angeles County collectively to say, how do we make sure, again, that we know how many units or subsidies we have available, so let's identify our inventory so that we all have the same understanding of what our baseline is. Let's then understand how many of those units or subsidies are vacant or available, so again, we all have the same understanding. And then third, how do we make sure that we're moving folks from outside to these permanent units as quickly as possible? And I think what we're seeing now is because the funding is administered in so many different pockets, it's easy for us to lose that universal understanding. We all have an understanding of our own portion of it, but not holistically. So Housing Central Command has done a good job of trying to bring all that together and building out a system that will, again, manage this inventory in real time for all of us. So the goal of the Housing Central Command, I've talked about this, decrease the time it takes to move people into permanent supportive housing, increase the utilization of those units with the ultimate goal of 95% utilization of all of our PSH resources system-wide, which we're confident we can achieve when we build out a system that has more automation built in and helps us identify gaps faster. So since the creation of Housing Central Command, which was December of 2019, we've accomplished quite a few things, and here are a couple of the highlights. And then there's obviously been, I think every day we have new things that we're unpacking and uncovering. But one example of the benefit of us just kind of coming together and having conversation is there were misconceptions about what housing authorities allowed or didn't allow. So there wasn't full consensus that housing authorities accepted digital documentation. And all it took was us having a conversation, identifying that, and housing authorities saying, actually, we do accept that, we can codify it, we can put out the policy and making that clear. But this is something, as an example, when we share this with folks who are case managers who are doing this work every day, I mean, we have like standing ovation rounds of applause because people have the perception that they have to have these hard copy documents, which just wasn't the case. So clearing up those things are going to make the process go faster.
And is there 100% PHA participation in LA County?
Yeah, so this is really focused with HACLA and LACDA primarily. Yeah. But they're both fully participatory. Yeah.
And the other ones, Pomona, Gondel, other ones, are they?
They're not within the scope right now.
I know they're not within the scope, but are they at least, well, I mean, it's something that I encourage to be brought into the loop of a lot of these things.
Yep, as we scale it, because they receive their own HUD funding, we have a little different process, but as we scale it, that is our goal to saturate the whole county. Yeah.
But if I could add on that, one of the original holistic strategies was precisely to try to bring together as many of the, I believe it's 18 PHAs in the county as possible to coordinate efforts around homelessness. So LACDA has been convening quarterly meetings of the PHAs, and I think around half of them typically participate. And a lot has been accomplished there around portability and other issues, learning from each other, and we have close to that number of public housing authorities receive Measure H funds through LACDA for landlord incentives. And other one-time costs where they pay Section 8 hours that they administer for someone needing tenant-based permanent supportive housing. So it's a little bit broader than this sort of specific question of the HUD COC funding, but I just wanted to share that, and I mean, Michael certainly could speak to that in more detail.
Other examples of accomplishments, the second one there is increased documented PSH inventory. What this really means is we developed a system that centrally holds all of our inventory for LA County, whether it's LACDA or LASA or DMH. We want to have one place that we're all going to find like how many units we have and are they vacant or are they filled. And since we started this, we've identified 3,000 resources, so either in the form of a subsidy or a unit that was not known to our central system. Not to say they were vacant, but we didn't know about them, and if we didn't know about them, we can't track them and look at performance. So we've added more than 3,000 additional resources to our central system to make sure that we're, again, getting to the full picture of all of our PSH. And then third, disability documentation no longer expires. This is another big win, and the Housing Authority has really leaned in on this one. I think formerly permanent disability documentation expired after 45 days, which was an impediment to folks getting their housing applications in. So removing that has been a big win for moving those applications through as quickly as possible. And then where we're going is moving to a system where as we're documenting things digitally and we're uploading documents for housing applications, storing them in one central place in HMIS, which is the Homeless Management Information System. But not only storing them there, but we're building bridges to the DMH, the DHS systems so that those documents are then automatically shared and uploaded into their systems, but they're centrally held in one place. I don't know if Michael or Maria have anything you guys wanted to add that I missed.
I would just add that we have been a part of this process since it started, and we have several continuing care contracts ourselves through LACDA and HAPA, and so we're very hopeful about these changes that are going to happen and how they'll help our clients. Of course, we serve people with serious mental illness, and there are many barriers to getting through this process for them. So anything we can do to help that process and help them, find a home faster, we're definitely in support of and want to be part of. And so part of this work is looking at the housing application, which is quite long, and having the HUD TA help figure out what really needs to be in there and anything that we can do to reduce the size and make it less onerous on the clients that we serve to get all the documents in. And I think some of these accomplishments will really help that. The fact that the disability form, which our staff often are the ones filling out, does not expire. When we go there and it takes a long time to process the application and then documentation expires, then we have to get a new documentation that isn't expired. So those types of things will really help this process.
So I'm glad to hear about the disability form not expiring. That's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I hope that there's somebody else reviewing other things as well to make sure that there's not some other type of impediment or requirement.
Yeah, we're going through the full process from start to finish and having these real-time changes made. And I think the big part of HCC as well, the leadership is involved. This really is work that's being driven by the staff who do the work, and so they're the ones who are best equipped to identify what's getting in their way, and then we can collectively remove those barriers.
This is a really exciting effort. Thank you all for leading it and coming and sharing. A couple questions just on the goals that you shared a couple slides back. I'm curious both on the first and third bullet, decreasing the time it takes to move people into permanent supportive housing and 95% utilization. I'm curious if you have the current state of time it takes to move people into PSH. And what the desired state is. I see a decrease, but not a tangible there. And then on the utilization, where are we now in contrast to the 95% we were aiming for?
Yeah. Those are great questions because we're still figuring out the answers, which speaks to the need for this, right? So decreasing the time it takes, we know takes too long, but it's very wide-ranging, and it totally depends on the resource and the subsidy. So that is something we're still finalizing, like what the true time is. But in other communities where they have these goals, somewhere between 60, 90, 120 days are kind of the optimal time frames to move people in from beginning to end. So we would want to be on par with where other communities are targeting.
Is that from first contact to moving into housing or starting the housing application process into move-in?
It might actually vary by city. I don't know where the team's landing on what they want their goal to be.
So I can say at DMH we've actually been tracking this information for a while now. And so we usually look at from match to move-in because so much can happen from the time someone first meets someone and assesses them, and the thing that we have more control over is the time that they're matched and how we're helping them get through the process. And I would say on the tenant-based side, from our experience, and I don't think it's different from other people's experience, it does take about 10 months on average. The project-based side is faster. So on our side, we've been tracking that, and it's a little over 100 days. For our clients. So you can see, I mean, if you have a unit, hopefully it should be faster, right? But on the tenant-based side, there's so many challenges, including just finding landlords that will, once someone gets through the process and actually gets a voucher or certificate, finding a landlord that will accept it is very challenging.
So by match, you mean they have a voucher in hand, not that they're matched to a unit?
No, I mean, they're matched through CES. So there's a housing resource available, we're sent, someone with an acuity level and qualifications to match them to that unit, and then starting at that process. So the time we put in, I have that wrong actually, from the time we put in the housing resource into the CES system, looking for a match to the time they leased up is on average about 10 minutes.
And I'm sorry, just really quickly, just on a point you raised, just want to make sure that it's really clear that under SB 329, a landlord can't refuse to participate in the Section 8 program and can't use their own, whatever their reason, their rationale is for not accepting a Section 8 voucher. That's now illegal. They can't advertise no Section 8. They can't post it. They can't put it on Craigslist. They can't music home. They can put a sign on the window, no Section 8. So, we are aware that there are landlords associations and they're being advised about how to circumvent this law by using things like looking at the housing payment standard that is set, that the housing authority set, and looking at in terms of what the advertised rent level would be. But I would make sure that everybody that participates in the program and any education to landlords know that they can't refuse to participate in the program because they don't want to.
And Heidi, just to circle back on the
Yes.
second question, the 95% utilization, where are we now in terms of funding?
We still don't know that answer either, and part of the reason is because we don't have the full universe of resources in our system yet. So when I talked about we've added 3,000 more, we still don't have the full picture yet to know what's vacant and what's open.
I thought this, my apologies, I thought this was referencing the underspending of federal resources, the grants that you listed out on the previous page.
Indirectly, it does reference that, but that comes obviously in the form of a subsidy or a service. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so we don't know right now how much we're returning on average the last couple of years?
So for 2017, that was the last year that closed out the full year. We returned $30 million, which is about 30% of what we received. 2018 will be the next year that closes out. The good news is that HUD has given us a 6-month extension to spend that down even further. So we're on track to significantly reduce what we are able to do through these efforts and through those extensions.
So I was just about to say that HUD gives extensions. My other question is, have you asked HUD for to be able to use those funds for another purpose? So for example, to be able to incorporate them back into the regular Section 8 program or to VASH or to another Section 8 housing subsidy program, so since we're in an emergency situation, have you appealed the process or at least asked to keep those funds from HUD?
Yeah. Reprogramming of the funding is an option. I don't know if, Michael, you want to speak to that at all, how LACDA is addressing it, but it's kind of a grant-by-grant analysis to see is it feasible to reprogram and does it make sense, or is it best to use that grant?
Yeah, so typically what we'll do is look at grants that are underspending, and we will take that funding, and once it's reallocated, we'll submit proposals for new grants or expansion of other grants that are performing well. So in the 2017 year, although we returned $12 million in funding that was underspent, we received that funding back towards new projects plus an additional $3 million. So the actual net effect was an increase in funding for more contracts in the future.
Would we have gotten those regardless of returning those funds? I mean, with those new funding opportunities?
Yeah,
It was based on the application
Right.
and need, yeah.
Well, now's the time. I'm just
Right,
encouraging
right.
to ask for HUD. Now's the time to ask for everything.
Exactly. And part of the utilization question too, I think, Christine, to your point, what we're trying to also build in is automation. So part of the challenge that where we lost track of all of our units is because when a unit becomes vacant, for example, we rely on a developer or a landlord or somebody telling us that it is vacant, so we know that we need to match somebody into it. We're trying to build automation in now, so when a unit becomes vacant, it automatically triggers our system, and it takes the human element out of that, so we don't have this lag time in waiting to see, like, is it open, is it not open? So we're literally going to buildings right now that are project-based and looking inside every unit to see, is it vacant or filled? If it's filled, is it filled with a DMH subsidy? Is it a DHS? And we're using that level of detail for every unit that we have available in our system.
And is that being captured in coordinated entry systems?
Yeah, it's held, we call it RMS, the Resource Management System, which is a subset of our HMIS. Yep.
I commend you for central command. I wanted to ask you, is that something you anticipate being permanent? May not be every day, but do you see that that stays in place permanently?
Yeah, what we're striving for is this real-time utilization, so even like a dashboard that we all collectively can see to say, are we on track with what our targets are? Is our vacancy slipping again? So once we hit sustainability, which I do think will be a while, before we hit that point, getting this real-time active inventory management is our goal.
Okay. And you have a fairly large amount of sub-recipients, so you at LASA are the gatekeeper, I'll call it. And what do you do during the year to fiscal monitor all the many sub-recipients? What process do you have in place, if you can briefly describe that?
We have, there's a number of things we do. We have a team that manages this in particular that looks at underspending over the course of the year and engages with those sub-recipients. Primarily, we engage with the large recipients who then have kind of subcontracts below them. So the housing authorities will have recurring meetings with them to review their spending and where they are. So that mid-year, if we need to move money around, as Michael said, we have the capacity to do that. So it's active monitoring throughout the year.
Okay. And I'll direct this to you, Heidi, but I think it applies to all four of you. In those instances where you have discretion to spend either a federal dollar or a local dollar, what do you do to ensure that the federal dollar gets spent first?
Well, I mean, so we use the federal funding for rental assistance. The only local dollars we're using are for landlord incentives to help clients find a unit once they have the subsidy in place.
Yeah, and I can say that our department has invested in the flexible housing subsidy pool that DHS manages, and they have an opportunity for other departments to put money through that, and so that's local dollars. So for us, it's MHSA funding. And so when we did that several years ago, we said we only used it for people that did not qualify for a federal subsidy. So that's a way that we made sure that we were first going to the federal subsidy and using that funding before we would look at a local dollar for people who don't qualify.
Thank you.
I do have a final question and recommendation. So HUD, right now, there's a proposed rule, the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing rule. The public comment period expires on March 16th. Are you submitting public comments? And if so, are you incorporating some of these challenges you're facing in these public? And I hope you do, because this is a very important time to explain to HUD some of these challenges that the city is facing to be able to use its funds in the most appropriate way to really be able to prevent homelessness.
Yes, in fact, we thank you for that. We actually did submit our letter. The Commission approved it last month, so that's something the Commission approved it that incorporating some of these things too. So we'd be more than happy to share that letter.
Please.
If I could just sort of make explicit something that was implicit in this presentation, which is that the underspending in question does not involve Measure H. This is exclusively that federal fund.
Thank you. And John, I think it was your question that also highlighted that even further the prioritization of federal funding before local funding. So I appreciate all of your efforts in that arena, and thank you all for all you're doing, particularly in this moment. Thank you. And do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, we have one person that signed up, George Buzetti.
Okay.
Great. And for those coming up for public comment, if you could please come up to the microphone if you're able to, and you will have 2 minutes. Rowena will, and you'll hear a verbal cue and hand it up. Sorry.
Yeah. You guys have a lot of platitudes here. How many of you have ever seen this? Huh? Much less read it or understood it. You're building these units, fools, for $400,000 to $700,000 each. You're building container housing for $500,000 each. You bragged about building over 6 years, 3,362 units for $1.7 billion, 505,687. How long I done this Board of Supervisors? Damn, 2 years ago. Who's responsible for this garbage going on here? They are. By your report, sir, right? I read your stuff. None of you know how to add 2 and 2. I call giant containers, largest in the world. I got a bid on a 400-foot top-of-the-line container for 65 G's each. We can put 28,000 homeless off the street. I can get the smaller ones for 20 to 40,000. We'd have them all off the street. Now, who the hell do you think brought the DOJ into this town? Damn, I gave them 10,000 pages of fraud, and they're getting the shit that I got on you fools. You're killing people. Your own stuff shows a lot of people die. You can't add money. Your own report shows none of you talk to each other, never have. And you don't have a system designed to be into place until the end of this year, if ever. What gives you the right to take those poor damn people down there? Has anybody ever run a number on the homeless that don't want your damn services and don't want to be thrown into your mental hospitals, which is what you feel at $3,500 each? Huh?
That's your 2 minutes.
Well, good, because you got a hell of a lot of answering to do. And by the way, maybe you ought to run the percentages on your overruns. Here, why don't you take a look? You guys are a fraudulent joke, and that's why I record it, because you're bagged. And this fraud is going to stop. Who's next?
And that was the last public comment.
Damn, nobody else is speaking?
Thanks for that.
Unbelievable. Well, let's go. What's next?
So I'll ask you to make your comment within the confines of the public comment period. Thank you.
Well,
All right.
do you have a response to the fraud?
Item on the agenda is item 6. And thank you all. Thank you again for your presentation.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. All right. So
Phil Ansell ran the last time.
Is update on efforts to project inflow, housing gaps, and housing placement. So we'll have Phil and
Not such a
Liz
happy faces.
speaking to this item. So this is a follow-up on the conversation we had at our previous meeting, where and I think the next 2 items are actually interwoven and speak to what we discussed last time about public communications and the contrast between what we're seeing out on the streets, the housing placement numbers that we see, which are at an all-time high, yet that contrasted with the results that we see out on the streets. So there are 2 items that we'll discuss related to this. The first is this conversation on projecting inflow as well as housing gaps and housing placements, which impact how we communicate to the public about our progress, which will be then followed by a communications plan update. So we will turn it over to Phil and Liz. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start, then I'll turn it over to Liz, and I'll have a break after Liz goes. So subsequent to our last meeting, we've been proceeding on a number of different tracks with the goal of being able to frame a holistic picture around the number of people experiencing homelessness in LA County, which of course is the result of the number of people who are homeless as of a given point in time, the number of people who exit homelessness during a subsequent period of time, and the number of people who become homeless during that same period of time. That results in the total number. And sort of our goal in doing this, sort of related to the last discussion here, is twofold. One, to establish a broader context so that the efforts that are underway in LA County, particularly the historically high number of placements in permanent housing, is more intelligible and reconciled with people's daily experience. But secondly, this sort of work, and very importantly, can contribute to the effort to both increase resources, to increase the number of people moving from homelessness into permanent housing, and to change public policy and increase resources to reduce the number of people who are becoming homeless. Based on the understanding that as significant as Measure H is, both in terms of the amount of funding and its impact, that what we now know clearly is that it is insufficient to even substantially reduce homelessness in LA County, never mind get to functional zero. So I'll speak to what's happening on the gap side. Then I'm going to turn it over to Liz to talk about the steps we've taken with the goal of being able to project inflow, and then I'll come back to me and I'll talk about sort of current advocacy and how it will be utilizing this information. So coincidentally, later today, LASA will be releasing a new, what will now be called a systems analysis, which is an update on what was previously called a gaps analysis that was released in 2016 and 2018. And the systems analysis looks at data on current inventory of prevention, funding, interim housing, rapid rehousing, and supportive housing, projects need in each of those, aside from prevention, projects need in the 3 housing categories based on experience and based on the most recent point in time count, and then calculates the difference, essentially what's the gap, and what would it cost to fill the gap. So as I mentioned, LASA is scheduled to release that report by the end of today. Heidi and I and others will be in Sacramento on Friday, briefing key members of the administration and the legislative staff on our systems analysis, both because the substance of our numbers are very important and relate to the state budget advocacy that I'll describe at the end of this presentation, and because the effort that LASA has been able to lead with participation from the kind of full range of core system partners to develop the system analysis is far more sophisticated than is available anywhere else in the state. And both the administration and legislature would really like to know what it would take in terms of ongoing funding for rental subsidies and services and interim housing operations to achieve functional zero in California based on our current homeless population and our current rate of inflow. And they're therefore very interested in our analysis and particularly in our methodology to see whether even in the absence of this sort of detailed, sophisticated data that we have available, whether it would be possible to project a statewide need figure, which again is relevant to the question of state budget advocacy for next year. So let me turn it over to Liz to talk about inflow, and then I'll come back.
So at the last meeting, your board has asked us to look into how we might project inflow, and we have been pursuing that, consulting with a range of experts from USC, from UCLA's California Policy Lab, our own county CIO, and although we're not yet at the point where we can provide a projection, we have had considerable discussions. We've been advised on different options, some of which would rely on a micro-simulation that looks at our homeless count data as well as our housing placement data, and then another approach using a macroeconomic kind of lens that would look at other factors outside of our homeless system, housing availability, income and wages. And for all of these, we're really looking at not just projecting a number, but creating a model where we can understand the impact of utilizing different policy levers to try to impact inflow. So we're continuing these conversations. We're trying to arrive at what makes the most sense as far as the data that's available to us, where we can have some confidence in the results that is produced. And based on what we've been told, we're quite confident that we can come up with some kind of projection and model that will be useful in the context of making policy recommendations and advocating for the policy changes that would improve the context within which Measure H is operating. We'll look forward to reporting back further on what we find.
Do you have an estimate on the timing of that work?
I don't. I mean, I think there's a possibility that by the next time we meet, we'll have something. I don't want to 100% say that that's going to happen, but that will certainly be our goal.
just to clarify, I think that the word something, in what Liz just said, did not mean numbers. I think it means like a definite approach, which we could then, is that, or were you thinking actual?
A little more optimistic.
Oh, all right, well, okay, we'll see. Yeah. Okay, great. So then, on the advocacy side, to say that Los Angeles County, there's two issues here. There's resources, largely to help people get out of homelessness to some extent, to prevent people from becoming homeless. And then there's public policy, which influences very heavily inflow and also has a bearing on people being able to exit homelessness. Locally, our voters have done more than any group of voters ever in terms of improving locally generated revenue. And on the policy side, a number of local policy actions have been taken that are quite constructive, such as the Board of Supervisors adopting a permanent rent stabilization ordinance for the unincorporated areas, and then a few additional cities that have adopted rent stabilization ordinances after several decades with no new RSOs in LA County. But the really big opportunities here on both the policy and in the funding side are in Sacramento and Washington. And in the present political environment, that really means Sacramento. So in that context, I'd like to share that in Los Angeles County, the City of Los Angeles, LAHSA, United Way of Greater LA, and the county, in collaboration with two core state partners, the Corporation for Supportive Housing and Housing California, have worked together over the last number of months to put together a statewide proposal for ongoing state funding to combat homelessness. And this work began and actually concluded before the governor released his proposed budget for fiscal year 2021, which includes $750 million in one-time funding to combat homelessness. So our proposal, which we released in Sacramento on February 3rd and 4th, is for $2 billion in annual ongoing funding from the state, which we propose to be allocated 40% to the 13 largest cities in the state, 55% jointly to counties and continuums of care, and 5% to affordable housing developers on a competitive basis for supportive and affordable housing for people experiencing homelessness in smaller cities and in unincorporated areas. And the focus of the two major pots of funding for the cities is capital funding, since cities control land use, interim housing and supportive housing capital, and interim housing operations, largely. And on the county COC side, the focus is primarily around rental subsidies and services. So that proposal has garnered a very substantial positive response thus far. Obviously, we have about, I think we have 96 days to go between now and June 15th, when the constitutional deadline for the legislature to adopt the budget. So in political terms, 96 days is an eternity. But we have generated a lot of interest and support. The governor himself, in the State of the State address, which he dedicated almost entirely to homelessness, explicitly supported the concept of an ongoing revenue source to combat homelessness, which goes beyond what he had put in the January budget, which was a one-time funding proposal. Though the governor has not made a specific proposal around an amount or the ongoing source. Last week, we released or actually, I think it was just this Monday, 2 days ago, we released a major support letter signed by the co-sponsors with several dozen additional support organizations on this proposal. And there was both in Southern California and Northern California press conferences that included Mayor Garcetti and Supervisor Ricky Thomas in support of this proposal, and a bill, AB 3300, by Assemblyman Santiago and others, which incorporates the core provisions of our bill. So I just want to share that and say that the systems analysis, which I mentioned, will be an important element. And I don't want to sort of jump the gun on what the analysis says, but I will say that the the findings in that analysis, the conclusion about the level of ongoing funding needed for rental subsidies and services in LA County, excluding capital, is consistent with the statewide proposal for $2 billion in ongoing funding. So, I mean, as we go forward, we will sort of continue to be very focused on complementing our programmatic efforts to optimize the use of Measure H funding to achieve the best possible effect with sort of advocacy and public policy actions to sort of address that which can only be addressed through state funding and or public policy changes. And I think that the sort of holistic framing that this board advocated, has advocated, can contribute in an important way to both the twin goals of advocacy and public messaging. We're happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on this?
I have a question, just, given the time is where you mentioned the fact that you reviewed public policy to look at contributing factors that could contribute to the inflow of homelessness. And, obviously we're in a crisis mode right now, and it's anticipated that a lot of people may be facing eviction this month because they can't afford to pay the rent, either because of fear, because of COVID-19, denying them job opportunities. They themselves are sick or isolated, can't go to work and so forth. So is there a discussion right now on the county level what if you're going to do something or review that or incorporate that into Sacramento? One of the things I'm just going to throw out there that is being discussed are emergency moratoriums on evictions right now. Another thing that also may be timely if the courts close and so forth as well. There's a discussion in Northern California that courts are going to move towards video conferencing for unlawful detainers and to allow that for litigants, but for a lot of our clients, that's not a real possibility. If they don't have access to a video camera, if they have a disability or so forth, that's going to make video conferencing an impediment for them. So I know it's being discussed that should not be a solution. Any proposals? Just asking.
Yes, thank you for raising that. So just on the more general issue before getting to COVID-19, we have been pursuing and, for example, sponsored SB 329 last year, which the county sponsored, the sort of public policy changes to both help people exit homelessness and prevent the flow of people, families and adults into homelessness. And we'll continue to do that. But I think the analysis that you proposed and that Liz is working on, as she described, will enable us in a somewhat more systematic way to try to tie that analysis to public policy changes that could be pursued in the future. I will say that on AB 1482, as you know, Chancellor, because you were in the meeting, one of the key gaps in AB 1482 is that there is no enforcement mechanism, no administrative enforcement mechanism. The only way that a tenant faced with an illegal rent increase or an illegal eviction can challenge that is to essentially, if it's an illegal rent increase, they cannot pay the rent, get evicted, or be faced with an unlawful detainer and then challenge the unlawful detainer. So that's not an effective means to enforce the law. So I just wanted to say on that point, for example, we are actively pursuing it recently, as last night, to try to finalize proposed language to get at that issue with the goal of enabling effective administrative enforcement mechanisms for the protections under AB 1482. On COVID-19 in particular, obviously this is very much at the top of our mind like everybody else, and both for people experiencing homelessness and low-income tenants who would be at risk of homelessness, this is a very big focus for us. Liz is actually taking the lead in beginning to research and prepare a set of potential policy actions, including an eviction moratorium, as you mentioned. One of the key questions as we think about potential policy interventions is the appropriate level of government to take a given action and the jurisdiction. I mean, for most of the relevant areas here, preliminarily we think that the county's jurisdiction would be limited to the incorporated areas, which would not be so helpful in the overall scheme of things. Obviously, it's better than nothing. It's a tenth of the county population. But there are actions that would be much, particularly given the urgency, there are actions that would be much more effectively taken at the state level rather than at a county or city level. But we are sort of at the front end of looking at that, and it's a day-to-day process around COVID-19 at all levels of the response.
I liked a lot of what I heard regarding what you're doing on prevention. I think in the past we've discussed what can we do to not just get people placed, but what can we do to stop the growth of homelessness. I think this puts us on that path. A lot of it is public policy, but I think it positions us for going forward to be able to start measuring some of these things and do it in such a way where you be in a position to leverage those dollars, those state dollars. If you can go there and say that, with this amount of money, this is what we can begin to do to prevent people from falling into homelessness.
If I could just add one point, our local collaboration in Los Angeles County has really been the critical factor in generating the level of traction that does exist in Sacramento around this proposal for $2 billion. And it's collaboration in a dual sense. It's first the fact, in particular, the city, LASA, and the county were in Sacramento together on this proposal, made people's jaws drop, because it is so uncharacteristic of the corresponding relationships elsewhere in the state. And then secondly, it's the results that we've been able to achieve. Jason Elliott, who's the governor's senior advisor on homelessness, spoke at the annual Homeless Initiative Conference last week, and he was amazed really by what he saw and sensed about the breadth and depth of this collaborative movement in Los Angeles County, and that's just reflective of the broader perception in Sacramento around the extraordinary numbers that have been achieved in Los Angeles County in terms of moving people into interim and permanent housing, which inspires confidence in our ability to help that many more people effectively with additional money from the state.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been such a big topic of discussion for us around prevention, so I appreciate your efforts on this, and we will remain optimistic with you that we'll be able to talk some numbers next time. Thank you. And Rowena, is there any public comment on item 6?
For item 6, we have Leslie Pise, one person that signed up.
Wonderful. Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. So, yes, my name is Leslie. I'm a board member of the... Can you hear me? I'm the board member of the California Community Land Trust Network, and I'm also a resident member of the Beverly Vermont Community Land Trust in Los Angeles. And so I have a question about... I basically just want to get a better understanding of how tenants can access the anti-displacement portion of Measure H. In order to have what I have, which is essentially permanently affordable rent through housing cooperatives in partnership with community land trusts. There's been a lot of interest among tenant associations and tenant organizations around this type of strategy. So, but there's question marks around how to access public funding to fund such efforts. So it would be great to get some clarity today on that. And specifically in partnership with community land trusts or community development corporations. So with them partnering to ensure permanent affordability through the land leases or deed restrictions.
Maybe you could connect offline with Liz, who's right there in the front row. I don't think we'll be able to respond to what you're raising today, but we'd be happy to communicate after today's meeting.
Can I just add how community land trusts are very important in a lot of communities. The 4 Black mothers who are experiencing homelessness in Oakland who were arrested and so forth for trespassing and so forth were recently awarded an award by the Oakland City Council during Black History Month because through a community land trust, not only are they released from prison and so forth, but they now are owning that, are going to be the owners of that home and so forth. So it is these are dire times, and we need to look at solutions that we've never looked at before.
Thank you.
Really good question.
Public comment. Thank you. Okay, so with that, we will move to item 7, the Measure H Communications
That was excellent.
Plan update. This has been, I will welcome
Okay, good, thanks.
Lenny, Michael, Scott, and Mike up. Any way, like, you can sit on either side, anywhere you see a microphone.
We need the...
Yeah, the slide changer is right there. All right, so come on up, and I'll just share some context for today's conversation. As I mentioned, communications has been a big theme for this board as we think about our responsibility to the public as well as the stakeholders in the homelessness sector in communicating the progress of implementation, the challenges of implementation, and where we are in any given moment. And understandably, this is a huge task to take on, to communicate not only transparently with the public, but in a way that they can understand and take in and potentially take action on. So today we have a group here to talk to us about some work that's been done to better understand how we can improve communication. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. I'm Lenny McGuire. I'm the Director of Countywide Communications in the CEO's office, and I'm happy to be here today to introduce the presentation. I'd like to start by thanking you for your remarks just now, and also to your board for highlighting the importance of authentic communication with the public, which is funding a large and expanding system to address our county's homelessness crisis through Measure H and other tax dollars. We recognize that transparency and accountability are essential to promoting public understanding of the county's efforts and sustaining public support for this work. To that end, at the urging of your board, the Homeless Initiative teamed up with us, with our office, to retain a digital communications firm, Helpgood, to conduct what's known as audience segmentation research and to make recommendations for a very specific, actionable online communication plan. You'll be hearing more about their research and recommendations in a moment. First, I'd like to just emphasize that this communications effort is tightly focused on explaining and showcasing Los Angeles County's specific role in actions in fighting homelessness. And we think that's a story that hasn't been visible enough to the general public until now. We know that people are seeing homelessness all around them, but they do not see the enormous efforts going on behind the scenes that are changing lives for the better. This communication project aims to do something about that. We're also working closely with partners such as United Way and LASA to coordinate and effectively target our communications efforts so they're complementary and not contradictory. Now I'd like to turn it over to Helpgood CEO Michael Bellavia to introduce his team and take you through a few slides.
Hello. Good afternoon. I'm Michael Bellavia, CEO of Helpgood. We're a digital-first communications firm with offices in Los Angeles and New York, focused on social issues and community building. I'm joined here today by Eddie Francis, Managing Director for our research partner, Alter Agents. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our research, how we conducted it, and why. First, unlike public opinion surveys of attitudes on homelessness, ours was conducted entirely online. This approach allowed us to delve deeper into individual attitudes because respondents could work at their own pace, filling out a lengthy questionnaire, rather than having to stay on the phone with a pollster who always manages to call at dinner time. In all, we surveyed 1,000 English speakers and 200 Spanish speakers. All of the respondents were registered voters, not because we are concerned about how they vote, but because we used it as a proxy for civic engagement. We identified 4 very specific audience segments whose demographic profile and attitudes form a useful guide map to how best to reach and inform them with county communications about homelessness. Eddie, of our research partner, Alter Agents, will take you very briefly through each of these segments, describing their characteristics and worldviews.
All right. I think the agenda has Mike, so again, I'm Eddie, I'm the fill-in, but Alter Agents is a female-owned marketing research company in downtown Los Angeles, and we were the research partner on this, and we're very excited, so thank you for allowing me to be here. As Michael mentioned, our research segmented the population into 4 groups. Each of them represents roughly a quarter of the population surveyed. The first is our civics Americans, They represent 25% of those who we surveyed. They're active participants in civic life, and they refuse to sit on the sidelines. They're the most politically engaged of our segments, and they're working to fix the problems in their communities. Homelessness is their number one issue, but they're also invested in a number of other causes. Out of all of our segments, they pay the most attention to their community news. Civic Samaritans feel comfortable around the people experiencing homelessness, and they're already engaged in directly helping those that they encounter. They're confident that full integration into our communities is achievable. They're also the most likely group to have had personal experience with homelessness and affordable housing issues. Civic Samaritans tend to skew more single and more African American than our other groups, and are more likely to live in central Los Angeles. Their median household income is between $50,000 and $72,000, and their median age is 40. Civic Samaritans are the natural allies of the county in our homelessness efforts. Next is the group that we're calling Reachable Realists. They make up 24% of our surveyed population, and like Civic Samaritans, Reachable Realists are compassionate and involved in their communities. They believe homelessness is everyone's problem, and that homelessness is the result of systemic forces, not individual failings. While they want to care for their homeless neighbors, they're frankly a little confused about how to actually help them. They tend to feel guilty when they see people experiencing homelessness, but they also feel powerless to do anything at a personal level. While they are sympathetic, they have more reservations about the ability of homeless people to reintegrate into their communities as compared to our Civic Samaritans. They're more likely to be white women. They're more likely to live in the South Bay. But in terms of age and income, they're very similar to our Civic Samaritans, with a median age of 40 and a median household income of $50,000 to $72,000 per year. These are also potential allies for the county. If we can give them useful information that empowers them, they'll likely become more involved. Then we have our busy bystanders. This is our largest segment at 30%. Like everyone surveyed, they consider homelessness an important issue, but don't feel as personally invested in the solutions. Busy bystanders spend less time following community news and are less involved in community causes. Of all the groups, they give local government the highest marks for their response to the crisis, but that could possibly be because they aren't paying as much attention. These folks are basically busy living their lives and want government to solve the problem of homelessness, but are not prime candidates for our outreach. Busy bystanders are our youngest segment with a median age of 35. They skew single and are more likely to be Latino than our other segments. They're more likely to live in the San Fernando Valley and central Los Angeles. Busy bystanders could potentially be reached through less traditional messaging, perhaps involving celebrities or sports figures, if we are able to provide them some type of external reason to pay attention to our messages. Our final segment is our concerned skeptics. This is our smallest segment at just 21%. As the name suggests, this group is highly skeptical of government's efforts to address the problem and tends to consider homelessness more a matter of individual responsibility than systemic forces. They're less supportive of government programs, both on homelessness and in general, and they have concerns about the impact of homeless services on their neighborhoods. Concerned skeptics are older, with a median age of 50. They're disproportionately white and married, and more likely than our other segments to live in the San Fernando Valley. Their median income is higher than our other segments, with an annual household range of $75,000 to $100,000. For these residents, straightforward statistical data on the cost effectiveness of programs like job training and providing services to people to help them retain housing and overcome mental health challenges could be useful. Finally, a quick look at our Spanish speakers within our survey. These residents are present in all four of our segments, but are most prevalent in the busy bystanders segment. Like everyone else surveyed, this group thinks that the homelessness crisis is important, but they think other issues are more pressing, such as education, immigration, and gun violence. Compared to English speakers, Spanish-speaking residents are more likely to believe in the effectiveness of local government as addressing issues in their communities. They believe in programs for shelter, permanent housing, and shared housing, and they are the most likely group of any of our groups surveyed to get their information from social media, in particular Facebook. You'll hear in a moment why we believe this is an education and messaging opportunity for the county, but I'd love to take any questions that you guys may have at this time.
And we'll finish with the recommendation.
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you so much.
I just have a comment. We get a lot of information sent to us to prepare for these meetings, and by far, this was the easiest to read and understand. So, you guys are definitely experts at communication. And I'm an ex-auditor, so I love audit reports, but that was a second to this.
Thank you. That is the main thrust of what we'd like to do with any of the county's efforts in communicating. Simplify. Okay?
Great. We're eager for recommendations. Thank you.
So, to continue on. So now that we've identified these segments, what's next? So the first step is revamping the Homeless Initiative website. In a digital media campaign, having a strong and effective site is job one. That's where we can direct the public and provide customized content according to their interests and levels of engagement. So we are already working with countywide communications to overhaul homeless.lacounty.gov. As you are probably aware, the website currently focuses internally on stakeholders already involved in the homeless services system. Our aim is to transform it into an engaging portal where the general public can go to learn more about meaningful efforts now underway, not just under the umbrella of the Homeless Initiative, but truly countywide. One thing I'd like to quickly note, our research determined that there are opportunities beyond the scope of this engagement to improve the processing and presentation of homelessness data. The new website will highlight three key data points in particular. The number of people housed in interim housing and permanent housing, and the number of people contacted by outreach workers. But we think there is potential to do more over the longer term. Once the website design is complete, we will be working with countywide communications to launch a paid educational campaign to reach key audience segments with targeted messaging. This will be the first time since before the passage of Measure H that the county has invested in this type of educational messaging. We will be focusing our efforts on where each of these audience segments tells us they get their news and information, through social media and online in particular. Three elements make digital media especially attractive for this. You can target audience segments effectively by using demographic data. It's relatively inexpensive, and there are metrics to provide ongoing feedback about the effectiveness of the content that we're pushing out there. We know that through focus groups conducted in tandem with our research, people are hungry for information about efforts to combat and prevent homelessness. They respond positively to authentic messaging that shows real people helping and being helped. Our educational efforts will not be advertising or spin. We will be focusing on acknowledging the true challenges of this crisis while bringing to light efforts that are achieving real results but are less visible to the public. In the first phase of our work, we will draw on two new communication initiatives that are already underway. The first is a new electronic newsletter developed by Countywide Communications that is now reaching more than 16,000 members of the public and more than 114,000 county employees. It's called The Way Home, and if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to sign up for the email. And there's a postcard in the packet that you should have there now that explains it. This e-newsletter is the county's opportunity to speak directly with the public about efforts underway that the news media is not necessarily publicizing. One of our objectives is to grow the audience for this newsletter. A related effort, also currently underway and ready to be more widely publicized, is the Powered by the People LA County video series. These videos are being developed by Countywide Communications to highlight the aspects of homelessness that the public can't see. For example, the woman who became homeless due to domestic violence, and the innovative animal care program that took care of her beloved dogs until she found a permanent place to live. Or the bond between an outreach worker and the man he moved into housing. These will be the kinds of messages that our paid educational outreach will highlight. If we can have 2 more minutes before questions here, we'd like to show you one of these videos, if we can, and let's do that now. Is that? Here goes.
Unmuted, sorry.
Oh. You have the power to do this. Where that little cursor was coming from.
Press the button. It's called unmute. Technically challenged, huh?
Es Margarita.
Jeez.
Yo acá tengo
A bunch of
63
losers.
años. Yo era dueña de la casa en Pico Rivera. Tuve que vender porque no podía sacar más de los pagos por comer. Yo me retiré de trabajar porque ya estaba mala. Tenía mucha artritis en las piernas y luego le dieron cáncer en el estómago y todo se perdió. Entonces yo me estaba viviendo en la calle en una tent, a cruzar la calle de un parque. Muchas noches que yo no dormía porque tenía miedo que me fuera a pasar algo, que fuera a pasar en la calle.
When Margarita walked into our office, we were captivated by the situation. We all felt like she was our grandmother, she could be our mother, because she shares very similar stories to some of our relatives who have migrated from Mexico to the United States.
Y ella me dijo que todos ellos se iban a poner de acuerdo para ayudarme.
We were able, through our funding sources, to put her in a motel. And amazingly, we were able to get her housed within a week and find her a place to live.
Me dio mucho gusto pensar que ella iba a tener un lugar seguro donde iba a estar, de la que yo necesitaba esta ayuda.
We really have to challenge ourselves to redefine what homeless looks like and who the homeless really are. Little did I know that I too would be at risk of homelessness when I got to Los Angeles and was actually struggling for a couple of months, spending a lot of time in my car.
Ella podía entender más o menos por lo que yo estaba pasando.
So when they say that homelessness can happen to anybody, it can happen to anybody, including me. And I have a master's degree and 20 years of nonprofit experience under my belt. So it drives me to do this work.
Marta la que me da poder, pero ella nunca me soltó.
So I hope you can agree that this is the kind of content that should be reaching a wider audience. I want to thank you all, and if you have any other questions, feel free, or compliments like you gave us already, I'll take one or two.
So I have a question. So what's the point of this?
The point of this? So the aim at I don't know if you want to let but
And you may not be the right person. I'm just saying because you were given the
I can
job
give
to
you
do this.
the-
But I'm just curious.
So,
I'll start, and you
And I
can
can
fill
follow.
that in. I mean, I think that we feel actually very aligned with your board, that we feel like communication is on the side of the general public, and that our goal is to serve as people who can interpret and surface content that is not visible. I think the point in really broad strokes is there's a lot of public investment in this, and there's a lot of, public interest and concern that the way the news media is structured now, and certainly even algorithms on our social media feeds are structured, that we can't rely on old ways of getting information out with a press release or a press conference or even just standard, tweets or posts on Facebook. That we feel that these recommendations will help us try, with a modest investment, but try over the next few months to see what we can do to overcome some of those Facebook algorithms, reach people where they live, try different messaging throughout we work with the various segments, and get us to a point where we feel that the county story of what we're doing is actually getting out there into the dialogue.
And I know that the initial impetus came from this board, actually.
Yeah,
So part of that, but part of that effort that we've been doing is really kind of getting to transparency about what the county is doing, accountability, really want to highlight that, and then education really to make it clear what are the full scope of services that are out there and available to folks, especially with like the segment of the Civic Samaritans who talk to homeless people, people who are experiencing homelessness, who are out there in the street, who might have experienced it themselves. They can be rallied together to help the county in all of its efforts going forward. So part of that effort is to not just make aware of all the services that are out there for the point of accountability, but it can bring about improved access to some of these things as well.
So as I think about where this came from on this board, I think there were two pieces. One, I think, is what you both speak to, that there's great misunderstanding about what's happening with Measure H and the implementation and the progress. But the other piece is this cognitive dissonance that I think the public is experiencing when they hear that they might hear that 21,000 people were housed last year, or they just generally hear Measure H is going great, everything's wonderful, and then they look outside or they see the homeless count results. So I think part of what this board, when we first started talking about communications, part of our interest was in how can we tell a truthful story also, and this obviously is a truthful story, but that captures that dissonance that people are experiencing. And when I see this video, I still feel everything's great things are happening, it's going well, but it doesn't necessarily speak to that second piece of, well, how do I reconcile that then? Particularly for our skeptics and our other folks, realists, I'm forgetting.
Busy bystanders?
Yes, who might say, oh, this is government trying to convince me that everything's fine again, when I don't actually believe that's the case.
Correct.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that every message and every piece of content that is produced is going to go to everybody. I think there will be a trove of content available out there. But in particular, we are going to try to target particular pieces of content with two particular audiences that we feel will resonate better with them. At the same time, some of that kind of messaging that you're talking about, well, there isn't a rosy picture out there, and can't gussy this up in any way. That is why we want to also make sure that the site is more reflective of that picture and simplified. So instead, right now, there's like 3 different kind of data dashboards and access to Tableau, and a data scientist can go in there and manipulate every single kind of element inside of it. Maybe you would understand that, but I was overwhelmed quickly. So we're really focused on kind of data, really condensing this for understandability's sake to see what are the key things that we want the public to take away and know, so that if they walk up to somebody or they're talking to somebody, they can say these 3 things. Because beyond that, that's what you all are really kind of taking charge on. So simplifying some of that messaging as well.
If I can just speak to that. So I think the video was really well produced. It did not do it for me, however. I have issues with that video. I understand what you're saying in terms of where you're getting at, but like that video showed somebody who identified with somebody as a grandmother figure. I would think that's already done. We already have that person who identifies with somebody as their grandmother figure on the street. What we don't have is the interracial, identification. Our number one with the housing right there, the number one complaint we have from Black persons experiencing homelessness who are in permanent supportive housing places is that they're being discriminated against by Latinos. I have to say that they're being denied services, and that there's a bias and a prejudice against them. And so forth. And so, again, I think if the goal is to try to get people to think outside the box and think outside other racial groups and identify with people on the street and so forth, I think we really need to kind of push that and really think about that. Not just got to kind of get somebody to identify with somebody because they see them as a family member, which is good and it's cool and that's key, but that's not getting to the real issue of why we're going to still see people experiencing homelessness and who we're going to still see on the streets.
If I may respond to that, yeah, I think it's, and we had to pick one to show you, we can't keep you here all afternoon, but I think that you're making an excellent point. A segmentation study gives us these groups, and we know we want to speak to people differently and where they are differently. This could be very powerful with a large chunk of Spanish-speaking audiences or Latino. There could be audiences that this is a winner for. There could be audiences that there's a really powerful video that we're doing next on a member of the home team, which is part of DMH, a person who herself experienced mental illness and is now out there on the streets paying it forward and bringing people into housing. And these are difficult. These are not grandmas that everyone can relate to. These are people that experience really tough times and that many of us would avoid walking across the street to. So I think we're touching all the content, definitely hear and agree with what you're saying, but I think that this is a series of videos. So I think the hope would be that we can develop enough content that reflects where our different segments are, where the different tensions are, and speak to people, the way they want to be spoken to, with the information they would like to get. So this is just one slice of it.
And I think that email series as well gives an opportunity for a diversity of voices, as well as it really is showing a cross-section across all of the county departments how they are all marshaled together in this effort, really, that it's not just the homeless initiative. Like, that really cuts across every department along the way. And I think that's been a really good way to kind of focus and highlight some of these different places that, was animal care has a role in homelessness. It's just, some of those stories are coming out that way. I haven't seen something that yet, but again, they have a trove of content that I haven't done a full dive into at this point.
If I could I just want to comment on the term just the homeless initiative, because I want to say that the homeless initiative is not the 18 people who work in my office. The homeless initiative is this entire countywide movement, and starting with 25 Los Angeles County departments who are part of the homeless initiative on an ongoing basis. So this series is the email series or the newsletter, The Way Home, has been excellent in highlighting those contributions. But I just want to be cautious that nobody conceptualize that work as outside the homeless initiative. The homeless initiative is the name for the county's big tent, so we can all be together and combat homelessness.
And I would say, to Chancelo's point, I think it would be helpful as a next step, and I think this is incredibly helpful information, and it sounds like an incredible trove of materials, to think through, to have some kind of list of what are the major challenges that folks experiencing homelessness are experiencing on the ground, and how could these communications serve toward that end. I think there are nuances. I think that racism and racial discrimination is a huge piece of this, as we see in both the need for more prevention efforts and the folks experiencing homelessness now. So how can we, what would be the short list of those, top 5 to 7 major barriers that individuals experiencing homelessness and service providers are experiencing on the ground, and how can these communications be in service of that? So I think it hits the broad goal, and now I think the honing of some of those specific goals would be helpful. And I had a question then, based on your research and your understanding of the community, how would you recommend the county communications address the dissonance that the public is experiencing and the rising frustration and anger that is resulting in harm to the homeless individuals and frustration? How would you recommend these communications address some of that?
So our aim is that we're not trying to shy away from acknowledging those very real issues. So part of that is that we first want to kind of pull people in, so extend the reach of the county, so that then we can have an ongoing dialogue with them via email, via social media, through those means. But the main aim is so that we can show that this is challenging work that's being done, and it's not going to be solved overnight, and that it does need people taking action. And the county is doing this because it was powered by you people who helped fuel this effort, and that it's only going to be sustained further if you continue to help support the work that's being done in some way. And so highlighting all these different ways that people can get involved, or how they've been reaching out across the county really to help out.
If I could add, one of the things I've personally experienced, and I think a lot of others have as well, is that it's really striking how people respond when we talk to them one-on-one or show them a video or give them information that they deem credible, is they're saying, I had no idea. The county's great. I had no idea you guys were doing this. We hear that all the time. And so I think one of the ideas is to take these one-on-ones and try to really expand it vastly to see if people can understand the positives. To your point, though, understand the dissonance and the negatives, is I think that that one of our challenges is going to be a depiction of why we're having this the inflow piece versus the successes. And I think a lot of what we do is going to hinge on our ability to consistently depict that.
I think that's really key, and communications, to your point about the directness, but address that